everyone. Welcome to What is Your Communication Strategy? Tools for Marketing Sustainability Across Campus. My name is Dallase. I'm the Director of Change Management at GreenerU and will be the moderator for today's webinar. We've put together these webinars to provide an opportunity for higher education professionals who are interested in learning about best practices from thought leaders in the field and how those institutions are implementing programs for sustainability on their campus. Here is the agenda for today. First, some logistics. Today's webinar was sold out. We are very excited to have so many people interested in today's topic. Because of this interest, we will be having a second presentation on February 10th. So if you have a colleague who was unable to attend today, make sure to let them know of the February 10th webinar. We will also be posting the recording of this webinar on our website and on LinkedIn. Since this is a conference call, we're going to keep everyone muted. However, we do want to address all of your questions, so please type your questions into the question box at any point during the presentation, and we will get to them in the end. The question box is located on the right side of your screen. We will plan to end at 12:45 or earlier so that we can have time to answer any questions. So let's get started. First, a little information about GreenerU. GreenerU partners with colleges and universities to help them advance their sustainability goals. We do this by partnering with our clients to identify and address infrastructure, operational, and cultural barriers. We recognize that all three of these barriers can influence the other, which is why we take an integrated approach to evaluate specific issues. Our team works together to engineer a systematic approach to sustainable solutions tailored for each institution. Today we'll focus primarily on the importance of good communication and how developing a strategy for marketing sustainability across campus can support your larger campus goals. At GreenerU, our work is informed by behavioral theory. My role today, beyond moderating this webinar, will be to provide an introduction to some aspects of behavior theory that factor heavily into developing the best approach for communicating your message to campus stakeholders. I'm very excited to present today with Novak. Alex and I met recently at the ARAPA conference, and we started talking about communication and the missteps we often see in the sustainability field, and we instantly connected. Alex truly understands communication, which is why we asked him to take part in this webinar today. He's the Director of Communication for the Sustainability Institute and the Physical Plant at Penn State. Alex directs all communications and marketing efforts for the Sustainability Institution through multiple platforms, including sustainability.psu.edu, Penn State News, and a wide platform of social media. Also, I've seen Alex present, and he is fun and a dynamic speaker, so we are all in for a treat. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dallase. Can't wait to get started.
Speaking of which, let's get started. To get started, I'm going to kick off with an overview of behavior theory and communication. I will then pass it on to Alex for him to provide his additional insights in communication theory and then dive into examples from Penn State. Our goal today is for you to walk away with a set of tools that will help you develop a communication strategy to meet your goals. Getting started, on the screen you will see The Cycle of Change by Pertofsky and De Clemente. And this is something for anyone who has dug into behavioral change would recognize. And at this point, I'm actually going to ask the audience to learn a little bit more about the audience to answer this quick poll. So currently on the screen, you'll see a question that says, how familiar are you with the behavioral change cycle? And if you could please select one, we'll give you a few moments, and then we'll show the answers to help us know where our audience lies. Okay, so next here is the answers. So it looks like we have a majority of people who know the concept, the general concept of it, but not too many people who actually apply it into their work frequently. And there are a few who haven't heard it before. So this is great for us to know, and it will give me some good context as we go forward. Okay, so moving on. One of the things that I like to point out is when we talk about behavioral change cycle to a number of people, one of the things when they think about communication is that they might have a goal to change someone's behavior, yet when you look at the behavioral change cycle here from pre-contemplation, which is usually unaware of a problem, so no intention of changing behavior, all the way to sort of this maintenance or perhaps a relapse, if you look at the full cycle, most people put all of their communication efforts into just this next step. So that is, they are aware of the problem, so raising awareness. And one thing we can know is that awareness does not equal behavioral change. So when we're going through today's webinar, one of the things is to think about is what is your goal? Is it just to raise awareness, or are you actually looking to change behavior on your campus? So as we go forward, the question to ask yourself is, what is your goal? And we can get to understanding what your goal is by answering some of these questions. What is the desired outcome you're looking for through your communication campaign? What behaviors would need to change? What are the current behaviors of your stakeholders or audience? How do you support those desired behaviors that you're looking for? What are barriers to changing behaviors? What are influential channels to communicate your message? And what skills and resources are needed? It's very important to ask yourself these questions to help you establish a goal for your communication campaign. Now, for example, if 80% of your goal of your graduates know about your campus's climate commitment, then it might be appropriate to have your goal land right in this piece here of contemplation. However, if you have a goal to increase recycling rates by 20%, then you're going to have to rethink about what your goal is and how you're going to get there, especially if someone is completely unaware of an issue. So how do you know where people are? Well, this is when you need to get to know your target audience. Those are the people you're trying to influence. And you can do that by doing an assessment. We recommend a baseline assessment. This can be walkthroughs, observations, interviews, and focus groups to provide you some idea of current perceptions on campus, what are their values and beliefs, and what the current behaviors are. So, for example, if we go to that recycling, increasing your recycling rates, it's really important to think about, are they, after doing an assessment, are people completely unaware that recycling is available on campus? So there is no awareness. So they're in the pre-contemplation stage. Or are they in a preparation phase? They are aware that there is recycling, they're aware there's a problem, and they are thinking about and preparing to act. So your strategy for communicating to those types of audiences is going to be different. So how do you communicate with them? To answer that question, what I'm going to do is stack up that behavioral change cycle, as you see here, and we're going to add some channels of communication. So this is the behavioral change communication strategy that was adapted from the National Cancer Institute. And we're also going to be thinking about what barriers are to change. So we're thinking about a few things here. We're thinking about not only where the person and your audience is on the behavioral change cycle, we're thinking about the types of communication and potential barriers. Now, off to the right, you'll see different icons with infrastructure for using the recycling example again. If you don't have any recycling bins, that's a big barrier to your communication campaign. We don't want to ask people to do something if there's not something, an infrastructure for them to take part in it, for example, recycling bins. Spraying cells is for things that might be too complicated or no messaging at all. So people are unaware of what's recyclable, or whatever messaging is there is too complex for people to understand quickly. Social deviance is sort of the too cool for school factor, that maybe it's not a norm to recycle on campus, and so people are going to avoid something that is outside of the norm. Physical effort is that if someone would have to walk up a flight of stairs just to recycle something. A routine is that people walk to class, and if there's not a recycling bin in group, they're not going to recycle it. Time is time it takes for someone to make a decision. And then lastly, financial. And this could be, do you have the funding to purchase recycling done for your campus. So these are all barriers that are very real and that people need to consider when developing their communications campaign. Now, if I were to look at mass media, mass media is perfect for people who are looking at completely unaware or contemplating. They're thinking about maybe taking action, but they need to know a little bit more. And so barriers you might find is, of course, making sure you have the right infrastructure in place, making sure it's simple, and making sure that you're creating a message that speaks to the norm of the campus. As people move down farther around the behavioral change cycle into preparation or preparing to act, one of the things to think about here is, are you making a message that's personal to them? They're looking more for experiences, and they're looking to hear from their significant others. And this significant others in this case, we're talking about their peers, right? So their peers are going to be the one that's telling them that this is a norm. And they're going to be looking for ways to make it make sense for their values and what they enjoy doing. And then lastly, these are the people who are already taking action, people who you probably work with often, like your eco-reps or engaged faculty. So they already have bought in. They're not concerned about the social deviance piece. They're more looking for support and helping with reminders and making it easier for them to do something that they already want to do. So I guess the next question is thinking about who is your audience, depending on your goal. So if your goal, using the example, is to increase your recycling rate, then you need to look at your audience here. So this is a graph that is the diffusion of innovation, or in this case, an adoption rate graph. And what you have here, people on your left are the people who are in action or preparation for action. So they're already pretty engaged in this process. People in the far right are ones who are in the pre-contemplation phase, and people in the middle are the ones who are on the fence. And in many cases, these are the people we want to target. And so going back to the channel of communication, people on your far left, you're giving those resources to. The people in the middle, you're trying to have that personal experience, bringing them in. Where mass media needs to be incredibly targeted, or ideally it's more of a one-on-one personal or group experience. And then for people who are completely unaware, once again, you're looking at this mass media. So I want to focus on these two over here because it's really important to not only that you're messaging to them, but how you phrase your language when you're speaking to this group in order to make sure you don't create an accidental norm, so a norm that you don't want, and you're really intentional about your messaging. And one way you can do that is think about your messaging. And I'm going to be talking about a way that you can create messaging that is going to develop the norm that you're looking for. So what you see up here currently is a descriptive norm. And this was done, the example that I'm going to talk to you about was a study that was done in Arizona, in petrified forest, where there kept being issues of people walking away with pieces of the petrified forest. And so they're trying to get people to stop, and they put up this sign here, which is a descriptive norm. And descriptive norms is usually messaging of perception of the behavior that is typically performed, right? So you're telling people what's currently happening. So they had a picture of 3 people sneaking away a piece of petrified forest with the sign that says, "Many past visitors have removed petrified wood from the park, changing the natural state of the petrified forest." And what they found was there was an increase in people stealing pieces of petrified forest. Why? Because the norm, the descriptive norm, is that people are going to continue to take away pieces of the forest, so you should get yours now too, because there's going to be nothing left later on. So by switching it to an injunctive norm, an injunctive norm is talking about what is the approved behavior for that space, and people want their behaviors to be approved. So they switched it to, please don't remove the petrified wood from the park in order to preserve the natural state of the petrified forest. And in this example, with the study, they saw that the theft rates dropped from 7.9 to 1.6. And so being very thoughtful about your messaging can make sure that you're creating a norm that you want for your campus. I often see people talk about sustainability as sort of a one-time event, or a competition, or this one thing you should do. But in doing so, you're accidentally creating a norm that wasting energy is normal, and competition, saving energy is extreme living, right? So once again, thinking about your messaging, making it the norm is incredibly valuable. And at this point, what I'm going to do is pass it on to Alex, because Alex and his team have done a fantastic job applying these communication strategies at Penn State.
Thanks, Dallase. I'm really excited to be part of this with you and with GreenerU. So I'm obsessed with metrics, and I was checking out the registrations this morning and saw that we had well over 100 people registered from 27 states. We've got folks from Ontario and British Columbia, lots of Ivies, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, and I was also really happy to see so many companies in the mix. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so to leave as much time as possible for discussion, but I'd like to start out with our general approach to sustainability communications at Penn State, then get into a specific example of how we treated recycling. Then I'll go back to some general communication strategies. So if you can go to the next slide. Penn State Sustainability Institute is just about 2 years old. It was formed by consolidating all of the sustainability initiatives taking place at the university. And we viewed the new website, visuals, and messaging as really prime opportunities to change the way people talk about sustainability at Penn State. The design itself is a departure from sustainability of the past. There's no green, no trees. It's clean, airy, and Penn State blue. And while a big part of what we try to do at Penn State is to move the sustainability discussion beyond just energy and the environment, we've also taken a system-wide approach to waste management. So before 1990, the university recycled less than a ton of its waste. And today, the university recycles more than 100 types of waste and diverts almost 10,000 tons from a landfill, which is about 60%. But what we realized was that we could push that diversion to 70% with the addition of miscellaneous plastics, and we could get to a whopping 85% with full-scale composting. But what that required was a coordinated collection between the residence halls and the campus buildings, two separate custodial operations. Now here was a golden opportunity for the new institute through communications to foster this collaboration and institution-level branding. So as you said, Dallase, this is no longer about students doing one thing and faculty and staff doing another. This is about Penn State as an institution making a concerted effort to reduce our landfill. So from a communications perspective, we wanted to engage everyone, not just the greenies or an activist minority making an extra effort to reduce their waste. So what we came up with is a program called Mobius, which is Penn State Waste Management with a twist. And if you can click through, we'll show the video. The video has very charming sound, I should say, which you are not hearing. But I'll go through and narrate as we go. Now we're waiting. There we go. So the idea, the tagline of all this was that we are going to close the loop on waste. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Mr. Wizard from television, you know that a Mobius strip is when you take a piece of paper, give it a twist, and create this loop. It became the general symbol for recycling, and no, that is not David Spade. We chose it to represent our waste stream, because the Mobius loop, like Penn State's waste system, doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. We also thought that creating a cute face with using the umlaut for eyes would make the word mark a lot friendlier. So to tie this into Dallase's change behavior model, our goal was to boost diversion. The goal was to change and enable behavior. It was not to change minds. And I think this is a trap that sustainability communications often fall into. I think we really need to let go of the notion that the philosophy of sustainability has to be universal. I think that our sustainable actions can be similar even if our motivations are not. So what we wanted to do was take waste management out of Dallase's social deviance mode. Not that Dallase is socially deviant, but that idea. Getting to 85% divergence is going to require more than a smattering of dedicated activists choosing to recycle and compost. We wanted to mainstream it. We wanted to create an environment in which incoming freshmen were immersed in a sustainability culture with reminders in their bathroom stall stories and on the Mobius stations now found in every residence hall, classroom, and staff building. So what do I mean by mainstreaming? Next slide. I believe that what we identify, that's the video again, I believe that what we identify as sustainability has changed and evolved from the green of yesterday. So our spoken, written, and visual vocabulary to describe a healthy and environmentally and economically responsible lifestyle really needs to evolve as well. So changing the way we communicate about sustainability, climate change, can help us reach the ultimate goal of mainstreaming mainstreaming these actions that can actually mitigate climate change and achieve a more sustainable future. Now, most of you are probably familiar with this Yale and George Mason University's Global Warming 6 Americas. It illustrates that only 16% of the representative population is alarmed about global warming, while nearly 13% are doubtful or even dismissive. So as Dallase alluded to, the sweet spot for communications is between these political poles and directed to the mainstream majority. Meanwhile, 50 years before 6 Americas, Everett Rogers, who was the professor of communication study, published Diffusion of Innovations. And he proposed that different innovations, in his examples technologies, were adopted by humans at different rates along a spectrum of personalities. So again, to follow up on what Dallase said, Rogers demonstrated that while there would always be small percentages of innovators at one end and laggards at the other end of the scale, the vast majority laid in the middle. If we consider the innovators and early adopters to be those already engaged with sustainability, and we think the laggards are skeptical or even dismissive, it should really be obvious that to affect real change, we need to direct communications to those in the middle. What we're also talking about here are Dallase's communications channels. In the case of Mobius, we provide different resources all along that bell curve. For the early adopters, we have a Yammer page where people can discuss just the crazy finest minutia of the waste stream. For the majority, we have consistent signage across the University Park campus. It's part of the university experience. And for the laggards, for example, a faculty member who said, I didn't get a PhD so I could empty my own trash, we have a ready response from our provost stating, Penn State wants to demonstrate the same level of excellence in its management of natural resources as it does in its education and research activities. Next slide. So I believe that the true key to mainstreaming sustainability and making its associated behaviors the norm is to create a space in which everyone can find themselves in Penn State's story of sustainability, whether they're students, faculty, or staff, or whether they're at University Park or one of the Commonwealth campuses. And that's through storytelling. Even those who are highly engaged with sustainability are likely committed in a specific way. For some, it's only about mitigating climate change. For others, it's about protecting human rights. For others, still, it's about conserving natural resources. Now, Penn State is fortunate to have a variety of voices communicating the research heft, the institutional commitment, and student engagement around sustainability at all points along this bell curve. So how do we help mainstream that story? Next slide. Penn State has 50 different marketing communications offices with 350 staff who all feed stories into Penn State News, which is the university's primary news outlet. And they represent their respective colleges, Commonwealth campuses, and administrative support units. Sustainability is one of the tags in that content management system. Now for us, a sustainability story is one that aligns with our Penn State definition, which is the simultaneous pursuit of human health and happiness, environmental quality, and economic well-being, current and future generations. What we do at the Sustainability Institute is work with news writers to ensure that we have a mix of stories that reach the broadest audience spectrum. Now, from a storytelling perspective, some audiences are going to respond to hard science, others to positive student experiences, and others to school pride. I kind of felt like a proud father taking this screen capture of Penn State's homepage last year, which, by the way, gets nearly 1 million page views every month, where 3/4 of the content was related to different elements of sustainability. You had the sustainable chocolate science, you had the wildlife conservation international student experience, and you had the local engagement with rain gardens at a Commonwealth campus. Now, since the 2012 launch of sustainability.psu.edu, the number of sustainability-related stories shared through the website, Penn State News, and external media has increased nearly 800%. Next slide. In 2012, sustainability at Penn State was really a niche story. It was relegated to a few communicators and only 2 colleges. In 2013, the Sustainability Institute communications team began a campaign of reaching out to writers across the university, explaining how their colleges and their units were contributing to this simultaneous pursuit of human health and happiness, environmental quality, and economic well-being for current and future generations. The number of sustainability stories sextupled, communicators quadrupled, and now 9 of Penn State's 11 colleges were using sustainability to tell their story. In 2014, all of Penn State's colleges were represented, as well as 16 of the Commonwealth campuses. Meanwhile, as a result of this steady campaign of news delivery via our mainstream newsletter, individual relationships with reporters, and a huge push through social media, we also had more than 400 external and increasingly global media stories highlighting Penn State's sustainability efforts in 2014. Next slide. Perhaps more significantly, in 2014, Penn State began using sustainability as a core element of its marketing and recruitment materials. The brand storybook highlights those people who use the opportunities provided by Penn State to make a difference in the world. And it's no surprise to us that nearly half of the inaugural features are connected to sustainability. You have environmental quality through the protection of endangered species, you've got human health and happiness through the development of clean water technologies, and you've got economic well-being through the saving of pollinators and the security of our food system. Next slide. Now, I don't want to leave you with the idea that you have to have a massive communications operation to get your message out. I mean, particularly if you're at a small school or if you only have one person and that communications is only one part of that one person's job, there's still ways to reach a broader audience. You just have to be really strategic. You have to make your larger institution want to promote your content. So as an example, most of you probably have some sort of sustainability social media channel or channels. If it's like ours, it's limited in reach. But you can find content that you're making in social media, you've just exploded your reach. So for example, if we post to our Facebook page, we get seen by 2,700 people, 1,500 on Twitter, 277 on Instagram. And incidentally, you should all be getting on Instagram because that's the future, especially for incoming students. But look at the difference if we can hit that full Penn State platform. How do you get to 356,000 on Facebook, 82,000 on Twitter, and 31,000 on Instagram? So the main way to get there is to do it with imagery. Next slide. So I took the shot on the left walking into work on the Friday before our first home football game. And it's one of our Mobius stations in the tailgating area outside the stadium. So what did Penn State post on Twitter? The sun rises over a new season of tailgating and recycling. 82,500 people saw that who might not even know that we recycle. On the upper right, I took the shot of this gigantic logo when they were lifting it into place on the stadium. Now, that could be perceived as an ecological eyesore. But the backstory and what ended up on Penn State's Facebook page was, quote, the logo contains 1,400 bright LEDs that only use 330 watts of total electricity, slightly less than a standard coffee pot. So 356,790 views on that one. Might that have made some of them think about turning off the coffee pot? Well, we hope so. Finally, we have a shot of the Nittany Lion with the manager of our recycling program. On the opening slide of this presentation, you can see the lion jumping out of the front end of a Tesla. Anytime you have an opportunity to get your school mascot associated with sustainability, seize it. The bottom line, and now I'll turn it back over to Dallase, is that sustainability is now not only a part of Penn State's news system, but it's really a distinguishing focal point for research, admissions, operations, and outreach. It's really become one of the best stories Penn State has to tell.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And, in wrapping up, I just want to do a few bullet points here to emphasize the importance of doing some groundwork before you get started. Start with a clear goal, identify and understand your audience, decide on the channel of communication that works best for your goal and for the audience you're hoping to reach, engage top leaders, and as Alex was just saying, attach sustainability to the university brand and mascot. And stay positive. Think humor and heartstrings. I don't know about you, but I chuckled with the David Spade piece, and that is something that I think everyone can enjoy. Alex, is there anything else you would like to add as far as reminders as people go forward on their campus?
I think that you've really hit on it, and I think that every campus is different. I think that higher ed is probably different than the mass audience, and you should know your audience best. I mean, for us, we've got a lot of students. We have a lot of different political viewpoints, a lot of different commitment to sustainability. So it really behooves us to go as broadly as possible to get our message out.
Great. So now is the time where we're going to do some Q&A. And so I'm going to be looking for questions that people have for us. The first one that I saw is going to go to you, Alex. And this question was saying that it looks like Penn State has a very strong communication program. What has been the biggest challenge for you to getting to where you're at?
I think the biggest challenge if we're talking about sustainability communication specifically, is back to that idea of making it interesting to the biggest number of people. So when we started out, we had, it wasn't even part of our original budget of the Sustainability Institute to have a communications team. And what we realized very quickly is that we couldn't possibly write all those stories ourselves. So I would try to move away from that as much as possible. What we did, and again, we had the benefit of a content management system for our news, but you can do it without it too. When we would see stories coming out of colleges, we'd say, you know what, that's a sustainability story. You're talking about an experience that a student is having where they're going out and making this difference in the world and, you know, underneath one of the triple bottom line. And once we got them to recognize that, and there were many authors and news writers that we had to go back to several times, but they began to own the story. And if you look at the growth of what's happening, you can see that they're owning it now. And that doesn't just reside in the news system. You know, you have your development offices, you've got your individual colleges that are reaching out to prospective students, and you know, they're sort of content agnostic maybe. So if your good story is a sustainability story, that's how you move forward. But it takes a lot of work to develop those relationships, and you just want to make yourself and your message as appealing as possible so that people want to tell it.
Yeah, and to add to that, Alex, I think we've talked about this, is really allowing, it's like don't go against the force of your campus brand. You know, I think sometimes we want to create your own identity so much with the sustainability that you're actually fighting against a brand that people know and like, and that you can get over that hurdle, which is usually just a personal hurdle. It can be really valuable for you.
Absolutely.
Another question that we have here is how do you incorporate sustainability message into the new student orientation program? And I think that can be a question for both Alex and myself. So I'm going to start off and then pass off to you, Alex.
Okay.
One of the things that I would talk about is that when it comes to student orientation, this is the prime time for you to set a culture norm. In fact, GreenerU had a webinar in 2014 that talked about the importance of creating culture right out of the gate. So within your messaging, it really is that creating a norm that's talking about what is the desired behaviors of the campus. Students are not currently familiar with current norms, so the ones that you can paint the picture for them, they're going to be more likely to adapt. And again, making it as sort of part of a tradition and something that is not seen as a completely separate initiative, but one that is a part of the broader conversation on campus. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Alex?
I agree with that completely, and I would even go a step further to say, you know, when you're describing the desired norm, I think with incoming freshmen, just present it as the norm, and I think that part of that again goes back to not making it seem like a fringe activity. So for us, an incoming student can't really go anywhere on campus and not see a composting bin. So whether they immediately take on that behavior or not is less relevant than the fact that they're surrounded by it, and they're going to be surrounded by it for 4 years. The other piece of it is that you make it seem fun. I think a lot of times with sustainability communications, historically we've relied on guilt and shame and fear, and if you can get smiling students doing cool things and making it seem fun, I think that's how you want to hit that incoming audience, that you're not having to suffer for sustainability when you come to Penn State. It's what we do, and it's fun, and it's what everyone wants to do.
Here's another great question. It says, can you touch on the cultural barrier, touch more on the cultural barrier and how to access a more diverse audience of students? And then it's followed up by an additional question to that says, please expand, this is for me, please, Dallase, please expand on your example of the competition and wasting energy is the norm. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on the second question first. So the accidental norming that I mentioned earlier. And this is one of the things that I hear quite often, and I've looked at different studies that measure energy competitions. And one of the things that you see is that there's energy competitions where you'll see a decrease in student dorms with energy used over a week or a specific period of time. And then often you see either a rebound effect where the energy drastically increases, or the effect of where there's an increase in another building on campus because people have just moved their energy habits onto a different building. And so there's one piece to that in that it's short term and really trying to think, if anyone who works on a campus recognizes how much time and preparation can be put into putting on these competitions for such a short-term gain, I think, how do you best put your human resources in place? And so that's why I tend to focus on things that are more of culture norming long-term. And so one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that talking about an energy competition, again, is, how much can you save energy this week? And then once the competition's over, you resume life as usual, or the current norm, is the challenge there. So I think competitions, and people like being competitive, and it's, as Alex was noting earlier, finding ways that something can be fun and engaging. That is absolutely a benefit. I just think you need to be very careful of your messaging if you do a competition. We've done, GreenerU has supported on a couple of institutions a zero waste challenge. And again, it's a short-term event where we ask people to reduce the amount of waste they have for a week. But the goal there is participation, and the goal there is learning who can learn the most about what's recyclable. And so we're not trying to frame it as we're really careful with our language, that we're not going from like current norms to extreme living. It really has more to do with a educational campaign that allows people for a week to increase their knowledge of what's recyclable on campus. So I can see it's a fine line there, but we're really thoughtful about our messaging to make sure we're not pushing the accidental norming there. Alex, do you have anything you want to add to that piece?
I agree with that, everything you said, and I would add that you can really find yourself in a sticky situation if you use the wrong language. So, for example, Mobius was a really good one. When we first started going around about that, and the manager of the recycling program was going out and giving presentations, his message was, we should all be doing this because it can save Penn State money. Now, for him, that was true, and that was a motivating factor. The problem was that when that was delivered to some staff, they said, great, where's my raise? When it was presented to students, they said, great, when are you going to lower tuition? Neither of which was going to happen. So that messaging needed to change to say that this is the norm at the university without getting into one specific reason of why we're doing it. And that goes back to my earlier point about everybody comes to sustainability for different reasons. Don't try to make there be one reason why people want to do this. And another thing is to be very honest about what your effects are of some of these challenges. So, for example, at Penn State, and I almost want to whisper this, but it is true, if we have an energy challenge, only about 5% of the electricity on our campus is under the control of occupants. Certainly somebody, if you're talking about turning off your lights, turning about your computer and all that. So it's substantial in that we're teaching people how to carry their behaviors off campus, but you don't want to make some big statement that we're making a huge dent in the university's energy usage by adopting these behaviors, because I think that is where you can slip into that greenwashing space where you don't want to be. So don't overstate in your messaging, and be very clear about what the purpose of the competition is and what the desired outcome is.
And to jump in, Alex, with the purpose of the competition is it's helpful to be specific of the behaviors that are going to have the most impact. Really chasing after students to unplug their cell phone chargers isn't really going to have that big of an impact versus making sure your communication is them closing their windows during the winter months while their heat is on. So making sure you're thoughtful of what your ask is also important when you're thinking about your goals and how you do outreach.
Right, and just not to go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh well, okay. Well, I'm going to just go to the other part of this question was there's cultural barriers, right, on campuses, and how do you communicate or have access to a more diverse audience of students? And do you have a thought on that, Alex?
I don't necessarily have a specific example, but what I can say is I mean, if you consider each college or each discipline or each dorm as its own environment, you're looking for what will resonate with that audience. And I think the key, again, is not to try to find a message that will reach them, but to let them develop the message for themselves that tells the story. And that might sound vague, but we see examples constantly that come through the news system where we would have never expected to see it. There was a person in arts and architecture that was teaching students how to make clay pots that had been used in Roman times to filter water. And that was really cool, and that was a way that his class, he was promoting sustainability, and I don't think he'd even been thinking that way before. But in terms of other cultural differences, I think you have to, again, particularly where we live, tread very lightly around the political aspects of it, at least for your mainstream audience. I mean, know your audience and don't go out on a political limb at the risk of alienating a significant part of your audience.
I also think this can be part of your homework before you put a communication campaign together. Is often we surround ourselves with people who are more similar to us. So really getting out there and talking to different stakeholders, and there's a lot of different student groups on campus that specifically focus on diverse subgroups of the campus, and having conversations with them and learning how they communicate. You know, not only are you going to be developing a partnership, but it might give you some new language to use within your campaign. Another question, we're getting a couple questions here about metrics. So how do you communicate progress to either your direct supervisor on the efforts you're putting on a communication campaign, or just communicating sustainability progress to your campus using metrics? Alex, do you have an answer for that, or would like to speak more about that?
We have this. I know that there's people listening at the Sustainability Institute right now, and we talk about the metrics piece all the time. You know, does more stories equal greater reach? I mean, we have a lot of different metrics that we use on the communication side. So page views certainly are it, you know, likes, number of stories, number of colleges, and all that. And there is some vagary about that. You know, with any marketing and sales campaign, it's very difficult to tie back specifically to, you know, one message, one story, one poster, what the effect was. We are certainly seeing at Penn State that with our recycling program that the rates are going up. And there are imperfections in the system, but we have a lot of audit data that we can use to see what the results are. And so I think that you want to know in advance what you're going to be able to measure. Whether it's electricity reduction, whether it's students applying for more courses around sustainability, whether students on marketing surveys are saying that they're identifying the university with sustainability. For me, of all the stats I showed in my slides, getting out to more than 400 stories in the national media with Penn State being identified sustainability is a monster metric, because that means that other people are talking about us that way. And that's really where, from a communications perspective, I want to be, because that ties into prospective students, prospective parents, prospective faculty and staff, you know, that we can become identified with sustainability. But metrics are essential. I mean, you should be, from just a web perspective, get on your Google Analytics, get something like Hootsuite for your social media. Definitely be looking at what's working, because you'll start to see patterns emerge very quickly.
I just want to reiterate the value of just getting something going. I think people hold off on doing any metrics because they feel like, oh, I'm not a social scientist, or there's no really perfect metrics here. But you really do have to start somewhere. And one of the things that GreenerU does in starting any work on a campus is starting out with a baseline survey. We don't know where we're going to get. We're not necessarily looking for any aha piece, but what it can allow us to do is, a year down the line or 2 years down the line, you have some sort of baseline to go back to. So even if you're putting a survey together now and you don't see anything significant from that survey, consider your baseline survey. Make sure you hold on to it. And work with a faculty member to make sure that you're thinking through some important questions, maybe demographic questions ahead of time. There are a lot of resources that you have on campus to create a baseline. And even though you might feel like you're late in the game, future you won't think so. So 5 years from now, you're going to be really glad that you did that. So take the time when you're putting your goals together to think about how you can assess things down the road. There's another question here. I'm going to read it out now. Our operations department, this is the question, our operations department is always keen to promote their success in terms of money they save with building and energy projects. These stories do not often resonate well with the students and staff. How can we spin the story to make enthusiasm of operations more productive? So this kind of goes right to what you were talking about earlier, Alex. Do you want to expand on that thought?
Yeah, I think get away from the dollars as much as you can. I mean, on the facilities side, like if Penn State's going to go talk to Michigan State and say, this is how much we saved by doing something that's significant, but I absolutely agree. You want to steer away from that with students and faculty. I mean, the cost of higher ed goes up every single year. Penn State is ridiculously expensive for a public institution. So to say we saved millions of dollars doing this is just not a good message to use. I think you want to talk about it in terms of stewardship. You want to talk about it in terms of conservation of resources, efficiency. I think there are a lot of business terms you can use to tell that story without talking about the dollar amount, because I've never seen the dollar amount go over well with anyone. It is in your house. I mean, if you're talking about how much money you're going to save on your heating bill in your house or apartment or whatever, that is something. But at a university level, I don't think that's a useful argument for the big audience.
To expand on that, I think when we were trying to talk about the success of work and get people excited, we're trying to tie it into the original value there. So for operations, it is cost savings. But we don't, it's kind of fun in some ways and liberating. You don't really need a lot of rationale. You can have a ridiculous, silly poster of, the success kid, and people are going to get more excited about seeing something that makes them laugh that's tied into something the operations is doing for the buildings than tying it into specific facts that, have deeper value overall. But sometimes people are looking for a little bit of brain candy or just looking for something to be cheerleaders for. And if you can have something fun that's ongoing, it's okay to do that.
Right.
Another question that we have here is, can you describe how you target different content for different social media? For example, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Do you have staff dedicated to particular platforms? I'm going to pass this on to you, Alex, because I know you have a lot of thought with the social media platforms.
Well, I got to give a shout out to Whitney Lloyd, who works at the Institute right now, and I wish she could answer this question for me. But I will say that yes, you do target it, and there are different audiences for different social media outlets. I mean, I showed Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, get on Instagram. But we also have Pinterest, which is its whole own group of people. You've got Google Plus. As much as I can't stand Google Plus, and me personally, I feel that Google is intrusive. it really boosts your search engine optimization. That's where they look first for content. So, but in terms of social media content, one thing that I can say that we found is that imagery is key. Get good, solid imagery. People, that's what they're going to click on. That's what they're going to look at instead of the words. I mean, it's really tough. If you can get somebody that can do infographics, compelling infographics, definitely go that route. Keep it short. You don't want to overwhelm people with text. If they want more information, they can dig deep into your website to find that information. But for social media, make it easy to share, tie it into school pride, make it fun. That's what's essential. I mean, all my images that I showed tied into athletics. I mean, as a tree hugger myself, that pains me to have to tie it into athletics every time. But the reality is that any time on our social media we put up the Nittany Lion or the Beaver Stadium, it instantly gets 100,000 Facebook likes, and that's inescapable for us. So don't fight it. Work with it.
Yeah, and I think this, to expand on that, and also this ties into the next question we have, is it really is knowing what your current resources are. I think we try to be all things to all people, especially when you have a small office. And it's okay to focus on one thing and start doing it really well, and look for students or additional help to make sure that you can focus in on your messaging. Because the question that I have here is, what does your staff look like? Do you have writers on staff to produce stories? Do you collect them from others? I think people, might hear some of the stories today and be like, oh, I'm in an office of one, and I don't particularly take good pictures, and not everyone gets my sense of humor, so that can be challenging. So what is the right approach for limited resources or an office of one to get the ball rolling?
Well, I will say that decentralization is the key. So I actually work in Penn State's Office of Physical Plant. So I'm in a completely separate building from, and again, I'll refer to Whitney, who is there. She's our public relations specialist in the Institute. But she can't write all the stories. And so, again, what you want to do is, one way to approach it is to find content. Find a professor in a given college. Find a student group that's doing something cool. Because even if you are not a good photographer, there are good photographers on every campus. There is in all likelihood a staff photographer for the main marketing or communications office. Tap into them. Like when we had a alternative vehicle event on our campus, I called the staff photographer and said, get over here because we're going to have the Nittany Lion jump out from under the hood of a Tesla. And he came, and we got good pictures, and we've been using it ever since. So that you want to become a resource for your other communications efforts you want to become a resource for good content. So I think if you're trying to produce it all yourself, you're really shackling yourself. You're much better selling the idea that these are good stories and a good story for your school to tell to the other communicators in the university. I mean, reach out and make those connections.
Thanks, Alan. Another question, and I think this is a really important one. How would you communicate a lack of progress, right? So if your institution isn't actually making strides, or negative progress, what happens when you're really trying to get people moving forward, but you don't actually have much to communicate yet? Like, how do you motivate future progress?
I think that goes back. Go ahead, Dallase. I'll give that one to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll jump in a little bit because in my role at GreenerU, I've been the director of sustainability at Babson College, and Babson has, prior to working with Babson, they were doing a lot of work on the infrastructure, but students didn't really know about it. So I had a relatively blank slate to work from as far as starting a sustainability program. There were already faculty members who were working on it, but as far as a sort of collective understanding of this being a mission for Babson College, that was a challenge. And I think this goes to that norming of creating messaging for what your desired norm will be. And it really was a lot of communication about Babson wants to be a leader, you know, we're heading in this direction, you should be a part of it, this is where we're going. It was a lot of we's and a lot of our ideal vision, even though we didn't have too much yet to talk about. So
That's right.
I think it's okay to talk about your vision and say we and get excited, and you don't have to be apologetic. Everyone has to start somewhere, and everyone on this webinar, I'm sure, has had switch in leadership where you sort of backslid a little bit and you have to get everyone motivated again. The main thing is to stay positive, because even if you accidentally slip and talk about how, you know, leadership doesn't care anymore, that is a problem. You don't say that. You know, you can recognize that that's happening, but if you're starting to say it out loud, then you're actually creating a domino effect to behaviors in a culture that you don't want. So stay positive. Remind yourself what your vision is, what your office's vision is, and be repetitive. And hopefully that creates some more traction, and you're going to be, as Alex was saying, creating instances of like a tree planting or an event, and you're taking lots of pictures and people are having fun, and you'll start to get that momentum that you're looking for. Alex, did you want to add to that in any way?
I just wanted to, I'm so glad you said be repetitive, because neither one of us has said that this whole time. I think one thing that is not right to do is to once a year come out and say, this is our energy goal, this is our greenhouse gas reduction goal. I think what you want to do is have many more specific stories. The stories that we find that resonate most are not the university level ones. They're the cool experience that a student had or the cool technology that a researcher worked on. So there are always positive stories to tell. So fall back on that always if you feel like you don't have a good story to tell. And as I know we're winding up, I just want to make sure that I mentioned, you can see my email address here. I'm happy to continue this conversation after the webinar. You know, and I also want to join Dallase in inviting you to come to the next one as well. And I point out our website is sustainability.psu.edu. Definitely go there and kind of check out what we're doing. The specific link I give there, the goodbye to green, is with all due respect to GreenerU, and certainly meaning no disrespect. It's how to broaden your sustainability messaging. And sort of moving beyond green to take it out of the fringe.
That's great. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for any more questions. However, again, as Alex mentioned, both of us have our email addresses up here, and maybe you can register for the next webinar. So this webinar will be available by the end of next week, and can be accessed by LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/company/GreenerU. We're on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Alex is on Twitter. Social media. You can follow us there. But again, it's been so nice to have you, Alex, as a co-presenter. And hoping to hear from all of you in the upcoming days. If you have any additional questions,